Hey, welcome back to Gold's Garage. Today we're going to talk about changing ignition systems over, and they're going to go through the whole process. So if you watch my videos before, you recognize this engine. This is our 4.7 swap engine that we've used as a subject of quite a few videos, and we are going to dyno this engine this Saturday. We're making this video on October the 1st, and Saturday's the 5th. And we're going to dyno this engine. So I sold it to a customer, Paul, and Paul likes everything about it except I have a HEI distributor on it, and he's putting it in a 64 Chev. He does not have enough room on the firewall. Only problem with HEIs is they're big in diameter, and when these cars were designed, they didn't have big distributors, so that wasn't a problem. So it is a problem now for him. So we bought him a nice, beautiful Protronics flamethrower distributor and also the flamethrower coil, and we're going to install that today. So hang with me. We'll explain the whole process to you. And before I forget, please like and subscribe. I got to get that in there. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing this, this is Trevor Culver's uniform, and I mentioned before I work for Trevor Culver Motorsports. I'm on his team, and a week ago he won his 7th out of 11 features this year, and when you win 7 features you should win the championship, and that's exactly what he did. So it's a pretty cool night. So you won't be hearing any more about this till next year. Trevor Culver Motorsports, I'm proud to be on his team. So back to the job at hand. So the issue is I got to change over from HEI distributor to a Protronics distributor and coil. So it's wired differently because an HEI only needs one 12-volt wire to the battery side and you're good to go. Whereas Protronics, you need to wire the coil and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is the terminals on an HEI are male terminals, and so the wires that go into it are female terminals. And on a Protronics, they're the other way around. The Protronics looks just like an OEM distributor. In fact, it even has a little window. So if you're not from this generation, maybe the window, oh yeah, it opens. So back in the day, that's how we adjusted the dwell. You open that little window and you stuck your little Allen wrench in there, and you could actually adjust the dwell with the dwell meter while the engine was running. That's what that window's for. Now, if you're born in this century, that's probably news to you, and I'm happy to bring it to you. So, pretty cool piece. So we got to change not only the distributor, but we got to change the wires. So, one of the points of this video is, if you understand it, you own it. So, I always say, read the instructions whenever you buy anything, and I still say that. But if you open the instructions for changing over to the distributor from almost anyone that sells them, they're made for somebody who doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't want to understand what's going on. They just want to get their distributor changed and get back on the road. And so the instructions are all about make sure the rotor's pointing to a certain point, get that distributor out, get the other one in the same place, and you're probably going to be okay. What happens if somebody bumps the engine while it's out? Now you have no idea where you are. So I'm going to use this little display today to try and explain what's going on. And if you understand that, when we do change this distributor, we're not going to pay any attention to where it comes out. It doesn't matter. And we're going to get it back in the right place by following a process. So what I wanted to point out is this top little circle is the distributor cap. So that's that basically with all 8 positions. So the firing order of almost all small block Chevs and big block Chevs is 1, 8, 4, 3 on the first round and 6, 5, 7, 2 on the second round. So 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. So here's your balancer, where your harmonic balancer, which is on the end of your crankshaft, so it turns at crankshaft speed. So every time your distributor turns once, your crankshaft makes 2 revolutions. And you have to remember that. It's really important. So Because it's a four-stroke engine, on any four-stroke engine, the spark plug only fires every second time the piston comes to the top. So the distance between the coils, the terminals on a distributor, between this terminal and this terminal, is 45 degrees. Whereas when the rotor turns 45 degrees, the balancer turns 90 degrees, because the balancer turns twice as many revolutions as the distributor does. So if you remember that, the first time around, first time the balancer goes around, 1, 8, 4, 3, and you're back to the same place you were, the balancer's got the same, there's only one timing mark on the balancer, it comes back there. The second time, it's 6, 5, 7, 2. So 6, 5, 7, 2. So one of the things if you watch some of my videos before, I marked every balancer, 1 and 6, 8 and 5, 4 and 7, 3 and 2. So 1 and 6 line up, 8 and 5 lines up, 4 and 3 lines up, or 4 and 7 lines up, 3 and 2 lines up. So I do that because when I'm checking valves, once I know the relative position where the distributor, where the rotor is, this is the rotor, where the arrow is pointing at number 1 right now, okay? Once I know where that is, I can put the cap back on and just follow my process. If I know I'm on the first pass, then I do 1, 8, 4, 3. Or if I started, it happens to be at 6, I can start there and go back around and do 1, 8, 4, 3 next. So you don't need to remember where you were, you just figure it out. And that's kind of the theme of a lot of my videos. It doesn't take long to think about it and figure it out. And once you do, you own it and you don't have to read the instructions. Although you should read them anyways. But the other thing to notice is that because the rotor turns clockwise on a small block Chev, big block Chev, on a lot of other engines, it doesn't on some engines. A Pontiac turns backwards. Well, turns counterclockwise. We won't call it backwards. I'm pretty sure most Mopars also turn backwards. And I'm not sure about Fords. Speaking of Mopars, we're going to have a 340 Dart engine here. My good buddy Mike Kimball has one that he's been saving for a project, and it's going to get here sometime in the next week. So we're going to have a 340 on the stand in the near future. So if you're a Mopar guy, we've got something for you. So let's go back to the distributor where the rotor's turning clockwise. So if you see the advanced and retard, if you're adjusting your timing, okay, if the rotor's coming around in this direction, and this is the cap, this is the distributor cap now, okay, the rotor is always going to turn. It's connected to your camshaft. It's connected to your oil pump. It's always going to turn. It's fixed. The cap on the distributor can rotate, and that's how you set your timing. So if you want to get to it earlier, you advance it. I mean, you turn the cap that way because it's going to meet up to the rotor earlier. If you want to retard the timing, if it's too far advanced, you turn it that way. That way the rotor rotor won't catch up to the cap until later. So advance, retard for any engine that turns where the rotor turns clockwise. If it turns counterclockwise, it's the opposite. So I hope that helps. As you can see, the distance between each section on the balancer is 90 degrees. So every time the rotor turns 45 degrees, the balancer turns 90 degrees. Now, for setting timing, when we get this distributor in, so we don't know where it was in before. So one of the ways to do that, there's really a couple ways. One of the ways to do that is to point the rotor at number 1, exactly at number 1, and line up your timing mark exactly at number 1. And then if you want to advance it, if you turn the distributor to the next pole between these two, it's 45 degrees on the distributor, but that's 90 degrees on your balancer. So a half of distance between one pole and the other would be 45 on the balancer. So a quarter is 22 on the balancer. So if you rotate it, advance it from 0 about a quarter of the way between one terminal and the other, you'll have about 20 degrees of initial timing, and that's a good number to get your engine started. The other way to set your timing when you're going to do a startup for the first time is rotate your balancer to your timing mark where it says 20 degrees. 20 is the number I'm picking. It's subjective. It could be 15, could be 25. If you have too much timing, the more timing you have, the harder the engine is going to crank, but the more likely it's going to start fast. The less advance you have, the easier it is for the engine to turn over, but the less likely it's going to start. It likes more advance to get started. So having a more advance helps. So let's pick a number at 20. You rotate the balancer until it's lined up with 20 degrees, and then line your rotor exactly up with number 1 spark plug tower, and you'll have 20 degrees, plus or minus a couple of degrees. And that's enough to get your engine started. So let's stop there, and we'll pick it up in the next section. We have a whole bunch of other stuff to show you. We ran into issue with plug wires, and we're going to show you how to check out plug wires and how to tell the difference between a good one and a bad one. Now, in the next section, we're going to do some exploration about spark plug wires. One of the points is why you need to check everything. So how we got into this, the dyno's this Saturday, and Paul, who's the owner of this engine, I already mentioned, wants the Protronics distributor, which is a beautiful piece, and the tower on it looks exactly like an OEM tower. So the spark plug wires that are on the engine right now will not work because they're designed for a tower that has male connectors on the tower, and these have female connectors on the tower. So one of the things I thought I would do, it was just borrow Brett's wires off. These are off the 409. And by the way, the 409 might not be dead. Bob Atchison from Atchison Machine called me the other day and said he's got a block. And right now I got Brett's head back there. We're pressure testing that block. And if that block's good, who knows what's going to happen next. But we'll be back to you on that. So anyway, I was going to borrow Brett's wires just because the dyno's on Saturday. This is Tuesday. And enough to get me by, and we could always change wires later. So because, like everything else in that 409, we don't know where it came from or what its history is, I thought I better check them all. So if Alec wants to come up here, and I'll show you. So going back to my Texaco service station days that we used to check wires with, here's an ohm meter. We're going to show you how to do that in a minute to check spark plug wires. So our rule of thumb was 1,000 ohms per foot. So these are the 8 spark plug wires that were on Brett's 409. So as you can see, 14,000, 25,000, 12,000, 12,000, 15,000, infinity. I found one plug wire that was completely, what the technical term electrically is open. In other words, there is no connection. The resistance is to infinity. It's off the scale. 7,000, 11,000. So even if that wasn't the case, my 2,000 ohms per foot doesn't work out very good either, because none of these wires are more than 4 feet long. So those numbers are way too high. So I thought I had a solution until last night. We are running out of time. So just to show how we do that, here's one of the spark plug wires. Well, since we're already connected, here's one of the red wires. So what I bought from, by the way, this came from Barry at Performance Unlimited Speed Shop this morning. Give him a call, and Barry had in stock. These are Taylor wires made for Protronics. So it's exactly what I want. The only problem is they're custom made. So we're going to start up the engine on this video, but I got to obviously make all the ends for these wires. So going back to my 1,000 ohms per foot, so I got one wire in the ohm meter right now. Let's just show that guy. And so this is actually, looks like it's about 4 feet long, and it's setting the ohm meter at 2,000. It's 1.398 or 1.4. So it's not even 2,000 ohms. It's less than 1,000 ohms per foot, obviously. So it's a brand new wire. It should be good. So going back to the other style wire, this one of the wires off Brett's engine. Okay, if we hook that guy up to there and the wire to here, And we are going to get a good connection here, I guess. I'm going to get a good connection somehow. All right. Oh, hang on. There you go. I had to change the scale because now we're on the 20,000 ohm scale, right? And so it's 13.89 thousand ohms, which, there you go, 14,000. That's that wire right there, 14,000. So I think the engine would have started and run with these wires, with the exception of the one that's infinity. We would have definitely had a miss in the engine and wondering where it was. So my short-term solution was using Brett's wires to start up. Didn't pan out, so I give Barry a call at Performance Unlimited this morning. He had them, and I went there and got them. So we are going to go ahead and show you how to change the distributor, and then we're going to start it up after I get these wires cut to length. So let's stop there and get organized for the distributor change. Okay, we're back, and we're going to change distributors. I'm going to show you the process of doing that, and this process assumes you didn't read Pertronics instructions. It said that you would need to understand it, and if you, one of my previous videos, I think when I made my little talk at, and I was down in North Carolina, Einstein didn't bother to memorize his own phone number because he knew how to find it, right? So the theory of that is, if you know how to figure it out, you don't have to memorize it. One way is to memorize everything, like you do when you're having a test tomorrow, and then you forget it the day after. If you understand it, you own it for life, and that's my point. So if you take that approach to everything you do, you'll have a wealth of knowledge in no time. So if we're going to change the distributor, so I'm not even going to pay any attention to where it is right now when we take it out, because we're going to figure that out going in, because when you put an engine together for the first time, you don't have any reference points to go from, right? So one of the things we got to do is, first of all, get the old one out. So part of that is just simply unhooking it. This is pretty simple. On a HEI distributor, I've already loosened it off, as you can see, so it can turn. I'm not too worried about where it is. Okay, the wires are pretty simple. And the green wire is your tack wire. The red wire is always your battery. And if you're installing one from scratch, you want to make sure that you got 12 volts coming out of that wire. It needs a full 12 volts to work. And the cap comes off separate, so we have to separate these wires. And this is just because your coil is in the cap, right? This disconnects the electronics in the distributor to the coil. Unplug all the plug wires. For it on the other side. And we're not going to be using, we'll be keeping this stuff all together, because I'll be putting it on, the next video will be about Tony's 302, and I'll be using this distributor to start it up, even though that's not the one he's going to use in the car. Unhook the vacuum advance line, which should be hooked the other end to your carburetor. I just did that. And there's a little clamp down here. I've already loosened it off just to make it go fast. On YouTube, I don't want to waste time making you watch me do routine things. So we need to then take the cap off. There's, in the case of an HEI, there's 4 screws like this. One of the things about an HEI, because they are bigger, and that does is get the terminals farther apart, right? Which has got a bunch of advantages. So the cap should come off, and the wire should come off, and we'll just keep that all together, and it's going on another engine next anyway. So let's put that away. So looks like it's somewhere around number 6, but who cares where it is, right? Because we're just going to take it out and not worry about that. Okay. Oh, this engine hasn't been started for a while, so there's not much oil in there. So the new distributor has to go in. I need my screwdriver. The same way. Because it's a new distributor, one of the things that we should always do is lubricate the gear the first time. And there's a number of ways you can do that. These distributors look just like an OEM points distributor, and basically they are wired exactly the same way. Only you have a little electronic breaker in there instead of having digital or ignition points. So put a little bit of Cam's lube on there because it's a new gear. Making a little bit of a mess here, but probably good enough. Now, I can't just stick it in there, right? I have to make sure I know where it goes. So, you go back to my little sketch. I'm going to put it back up here now. So, the balancer comes around to the timing mark, where timing mark number 16, twice. Once when number 1 is firing, and once when number 6 is firing. And actually, you could start an engine you can even time an engine by putting your timing light on number 6, because the balancer comes around the same place, okay? Where it'll work exactly the same as timing it on number 1. But I'm going to start with number 1, so we need to know when it comes around the first time, it's number 1 firing, not number 1 overlap. On the next cycle, when it comes around, number 6 is firing, and number 1's on the overlap cycle, which means as the intake valve is opening, the exhaust valve is closing, and it's purging out fuel for the next cycle. So we need to do, power's on, is find out where we have compression. So the way I do that is take number 1 spark plug out. Okay. And just put your finger in the hole. There. I felt it. So there's number 1 timing mark right now. I actually went a little bit past, so I'm going to have to turn it back a little bit. There's number 1. Okay. We know it's on the firing cycle. I just felt the compression. So if I want to start with 20 degrees advance, so what I do is turn it back. So it's hard to read on the damper. There is, can you see that with the light? Where's my light? There it is. Okay, so there's 30 degrees. Okay, there's 0. So there's about 10. So if I go about halfway in between, any number in there, 15, 20 degrees. Okay, or so. That's 30. I guess I should have marked that. There's 36 degrees. There's 0 up there. So I'm about halfway in between, 18 or 20 degrees. Good enough. So what I want to do now is install the distributor. If I turn the cap so the rotor points right at number 1, it's going to have 15 degrees of initial timing, which is all I need to get started. So let's see if we can do that. Just drop the distributor in. Now here's the next tricky part, is that, so the other thing is, starting off, the convention is number 1 tower on the cap should point to number 1 cylinder. Doesn't have to. It works. It doesn't care. On an HEI, it kind of matters because the wires and stuff aren't going to reach if you don't. On this kind of distributor, it doesn't really matter. But number 1 should point to number 1 cylinder. So I'm trying to do that, but you know what? It won't go down, right? Or did it go down? Son of a gun, it went down. So if it doesn't go down, what you need to do is rotate the engine, holding the distributor down, until it does go down, and it will be at number 1. So okay, so now I got to go back and recheck my timing mark. Now it's right at 0, so I need to turn it back again. So there's the timing mark 0. There's the timing mark on the balancer, so it's at 0. There's 20 degrees. So let's go up to 20 degrees. Close enough. Doesn't have to be exactly. enough to get it started. Like I said, when your engine's starting or running at low speed, you're not compressing the fuel air mixture. It's not very dense. It takes a long time to fire. So the more timing, the better. The only problem, if you get too much timing, it's hard to turn over. So typically in a race engine, for example, what we do is the driver has a switch for his ignition and for his starter. He flicks the starter, gets the starter spinning, then he turns his ignition on, and that saves having to crank against 36 or whatever number of degrees initial advance. So all we have to do now when we install the cap is, where's my little, there's always a little notch on the bottom of the cap that lines up with a little notch on the distributor. There we go. So now all we have to do, if we, simple enough, turn the cap until it's lined up, we now have 20 degrees of initial advance. So what I need to do next is bolt the distributor down, and I need to cut all these wires to length. I just picked this up on the way home today, and obviously they're cut to length wires, and I've got to do that. So we're going to take a little break here. We're going to come back when we get the wires all cut to length, and I'm going to install number one right there where the rotor was facing. I'm going to clamp the distributor down, and that engine is going to fire on the first pull. First of all, always read the instructions. So if you read the instructions for Portronics, there's an instruction in there that says do not leave the ignition on unless the engine is running. So, and maybe somebody can give me a comment about why that is. I mean, you are putting 12 volts to your coil. Coil's going to get warm, probably. And that may be the reason, whether somebody's had that experience before with Portronics. Now, that also applies if you have ignition points. It always was. If you have ignition points and you leave your ignition on and the points are almost at contact point, so there's 12 volts trying to jump from one side of that contact to the other, and that's what kind of wears out the points, is when they make that contact. So maybe somebody's got a comment about that, but one of the reasons why you need to read your instructions. I said we had these nice red Taylor wires for Portronics distributor, but they were cut to length. So we had the distributor in, but we didn't have the wires, so we had to stop. Cutting to length is not a fun job, and one of the issues that makes it tough is trying to feed the wires through the boot. So if anybody's going to do this, I'd recommend you get yourself some silicone spray, silicone lubricant works good on this anyways. It made it possible to push those wires through the boots, and very difficult to do that without it. So so what did we do so far before I had to cut the wires? We had the distributor in, so how do we know where to put it? Just a little recap. The balancer timing mark comes around twice every time the distributor goes around once. So when the balancer mark comes around, you want to know if you're going to start your number one spark plug there. I marked it on the distributor, by the way, so someone can always find number one to get started. The distributor turns clockwise. So in order to make sure we got it in the right place, what we do is take the spark plug out, crank the engine over. When you feel compression coming up, you know you're on the compression stroke, because that mark's going to come up again on the overlap stroke, and that would be the wrong place to put it. You'd be number one, you'd be number 6 firing if you did that. So we did that yesterday. Dropped the distributor in. It fell in very nice. Usually they don't. If they don't, just crank the engine around when it's in the right place, and it'll fall in as it turns around. It's just a matter of lining up those little helical gears on your camshaft and your distributor drive to do that. So that'll help you get in the right place. So we're ready to start once again. So what I did next was I lined the timing mark up to 20 degrees, approximately 20 degrees before top dead center against the 0 point on the timing tab. And when you line up the distributor rotor pointing to number 1, and you got that set to number to 20 degrees before top dead center, you'll have 20 degrees before top dead center. That's good enough to get the engine started. I mentioned already, to get it started, it likes a little more advanced than a little less. If there's a little more, it might make it a little harder to crank, but it'll start faster. And that's the way I usually do that. And of course, then we have to come back and get the timing light on it and set the timing exactly. In fact, I'm probably not even going to do that. I'm going to take it to the dyno tonight, and Saturday morning when we start it up, we'll set the final timing when it's on the dyno. It's close enough to run. So the only thing I have to warn you, I'm having a little trouble with my battery. This battery came out of my race car 10 years ago, so it doesn't owe me anything. It's had a hard life because there's no alternator, so it's always charged with a charger. So it's starting to crank over a little slow. Hopefully it's going to crank over enough to get it running. So for my customer and everybody else, I want to show that it's running. Got the Protronics distributor, Protronics flamethrower coil. I'll get this out of the way, and we'll fire it up. So switch is on. Turn everything on. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure it runs good, plug wires in the right order. Now, got to mention one other thing. The firing order that I showed in the previous part of the video, 184365572, is correct for 99.9% of all Chevrolet small blocks. This happens to be the engine that we use, the 4.7 swap. So it's not 1843, it's 1873. 6542. So everything else applies, except this is kind of a unique engine. We are kind of experimenting with the 4.7 swap. There are supposed to be some advantages. The new LS engines use a 4.7 swap firing order, so I'm pretty sure GM guys put some thought into that before they made that change. The other thing is, you notice the tack didn't work because I didn't bother to hook it up. So all I did is run a temporary wire from my ignition. I got 12 volts there to the positive side of the coil. The negative side of the coil goes to the distributor. And one of the things to note, if you're going to install something like this, Paul Phelan is my customer. He's got a 64 Chevy. So in 1964, the power wire going to the positive side of the coil only had about 8 volts, not 12. And how the engine started, there was another little wire that came from the starter. While the engine's cranking, 12 volts goes to the coil. From the starter to the coil, 12 volts goes to the coil just while it's starting. Once it's started, it goes back to 8 volts. Why did they do that? Because those engines had ignition points, and the high voltage was tough on ignition points. The higher the voltage is, the more the points are going to arc and wear out sooner. So they ran on 8 volts, which was enough. But if you're going to install a modern electronics distributor, you need to check and make sure you got 12 volts to your coil, which I've done. So that kind of wraps it up. Hope you enjoyed watching this. Please give me any questions or concerns that you have, any comments. And this engine is going to be on the dyno. This is Wednesday. I'm taking it to Darrell tonight, and he'll have it mounted when we get there Saturday morning. And we're going to do the carburetor test and air filter test. We're going to use multiple carburetors on it. And we're going to use Eldebrock, Holly, Quadrajet, even an Carter AFB carburetor. And then we're going to do some air filter tests. We're going to use a full-size 3-inch air filter, a 1-inch air filter. Also, we're going to turn the lid of the air filter upside down because a lot of people commented. We discussed this in the previous video, and guys said, when I turn my air filter lid upside down, I get 30 more horsepower. So we're going to find out when we turn it around if it actually gets. It sounds like it's making 30 more horsepower for sure. We used to do that all the time. Whether it really does, we'll find out on Saturday. Thank you for watching and subscribing, liking. Just a little statistic still, only 5 to 10% of the people watching this video are subscribers. So if you're as old as me, you can remember when TV came out, it was free. You didn't even, before cable came along, it was free. All you had to have was this rabbit ears on your top of your television, and you got free television, okay? So right now you got free YouTube. That might not be forever. It's free to subscribe, and if you do that, it definitely helps me and everybody else that is trying to make videos to help you out. So we keep forgetting sometimes the tip of the day, and so I actually have one today, so we're going to throw that in here. I went to a car show recently in Elsa Craig with my buddy Roger, and we ran into a good friend of his who had a really nice 67 Camaro 427, L88 427, beautiful piece. And so we looked at it, and I said, how's it run? He said, oh, it runs great, except it's hard to start when it's hot. So I said, well, how do you start it? He said, well, I get in it and I pump it 3 or 4 times, and then I try to crank it, and it never starts. So the point is, when your engine's hot, you don't need to pump it 3 or 4 times. And if I back up a little bit, I think one of the issues today with people that have hot rods, their other car that they drive today, working back or whatever every day, probably has fuel injection. So if you have fuel injection, it does all the thinking for you. You don't need to know what's going on. It provides the exact right fuel air mixture, whether it's hot or cold or whatever. And typically any engine with electronic fuel injection and a computer will start immediately. So let's try to understand what's going on. First thing is, your engine has a choke for cold starting only. Let me throw that in here. I don't even use it. I back off my choke 100%. And the reason I don't like using it is if you have a choke, you also have a fast idle. So what a choke does, Ellie can come in here, is when the engine is cold, this little butterfly closes completely. And when it's cold, you do have to pump it a couple of times because there's no fuel in the engine, right? If it's a carbureted engine. So what that does is the engine is trying to create a huge vacuum when the piston comes down. And by having that close, it lowers the pressure in the manifold. So atmospheric pressure is 14.7 psi. The pressure in the manifold, when you have that closed, because air can't get in there, you could put a rag over there. We do the same thing, by the way, or your hand. Reduces the pressure in the manifold. So when you reduce the pressure, it helps the liquid to turn to a gas, okay? Because liquid gas doesn't burn, but gas vapors burns when it's in a gaseous form. And you get it that way by lowering the pressure in the manifold. So when that's closed, the manifold pressure is less than atmospheric. The liquid turns into a gas, the gas fires, and that's how you get your engine started. If you have a hot engine, okay, you don't need to do any of that because you already have the right conditions. And when you go to start it, if you pump it 4 or 5 times, you're going to pump liquid gas on those spark plugs. You're going to get the plugs wet, and now it's not going to want to start. And how do you fix that? If you wait a little while, if the engine's hot, they'll probably evaporate and it will start later. If you get really bad, you may have to take the spark plugs out. So getting the plugs wet is not a good thing to do. When your engine is hot, what I suggest is starting, if you don't know, start cranking without touching the accelerator at all. If it sounds like it still needs a little bit of gas, then give it a little bit, and that'll get you going. But don't give it 4 or 5 pumps on a hot engine when the gas is already evaporating. Back to the choke. One of the reasons I don't like using a choke is chokes are designed when you are starting an engine under cold conditions. And most guys with hot rods don't drive them in cold conditions. Like I'm talking 0 or sub-zero freezing conditions. And the reason that is because it's very hard to ignite the gas. So you put enough in there, right? And with the choke on, some of it will start and get you going. One of the problems is what goes on with it, not only the choke that closes this, so what happens also on the baffle that closes, if it's electronic, there's a little wound wire in there, and you put 12 volts to it. It heats that up, and when it unwinds, it opens this butterfly up. But you still got your fast idle on. How do you get that off? You pump the gas, right? You pump to get the fast idle off. And when you do that, you pour a bunch more gas down the engine that it doesn't need, it doesn't want, it doesn't burn. What does it do? It washes down your cylinder walls. And 90% of the cylinder wall wear, the ring wear, piston wear in an engine occurs during the first 5 or 10 minutes of an engine running. So my thinking is, unless you're in a cold condition where you need cold starts, where you need a choke like that, wind it right back out, give it a couple shots, get it running, drive it nice and easy until it gets warmed up, and then you're good to go. That's how I do it. Everybody has their own way. So hope you found a little bit of that interesting, and hope it's helpful to getting your hot engine started. Please remember to like and subscribe. We just passed, since I made the last video, we just passed 2 million views. That's a milestone for Gold Scratch, and you made it possible. Thank you for watching.